Okay, we are going to the next, and that is Sister Bernardine Pemii. So please come forward.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm asked to present the specific cultural factors related to my work. My name is Sister Bernardine Pemii, a daughter of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. Born Nigerian, but I've lived over 2.5 decades working in Ghana as an educationist in the classroom and in administration. The title of my work is The Experiences of Religion and Spirituality as Aid to Recovery and Reintegration Among People Affected by Sexual Abuse Within the Catholic Context in Ghana and Nigeria. A very unique topic in a unique context. And I'm going to go straight to the format. A bit of introduction, background, and then the specific cultural factors that affected my work, the insights, and conclusion. The country Nigeria is highly populated as compared to Ghana, although it wasn't a research of comparison, but it's good to know because the larger population of both countries are young people and children who are very vulnerable to abuse. They say when we talk about the church statistics of both countries. As a teacher, I spent 2 years training teachers, students, parents, and other stakeholders in awareness of the fact of abuse, and the concentration was on corporal punishment, as we have heard a lot here. And during the training in the 356 schools we had, there was an interesting discovery that sexual abuse within the schools was as much as the corporal punishment that we are talking about. And so in my licentiate, I spent a lot of time talking about this corporal punishment and sexual abuse in schools. But the interesting thing was, when the children were abused within the school setting at home, they all went to church for prayers, for recovery, for healing. None of them thought of going to report to the civil authorities because they felt they took consolence and consolation within the church. And the church ministers, the religious, the pastors were willing to help them to recover through prayers. The question that brought me to my topic now was, when they are in the church and the church gives them the consolation, they feel that they have healing in the church, what happens when the church representatives abuse them? Do they still stay within the church? Do they still find the same solace within the church? This is a topic that, when I introduced it during the trainings and I asked for people sample their opinions if they will be willing to participate, I got a lot of responses in the positive, that they will be willing to do that. But in the actual sense, when I started my interviews, more than half backed off. And that is part of what the cultural setting have made it to be. My area of concentration was more on the fact that within this context, people are aware that sexual abuse happens within the church, but we are not ready to talk about it. And so I was looking at people who are willing to share the fact that they experience abuse within the context of the church and by church representatives, not teachers. So getting the people who will be willing to share this was very difficult. At the same time, those who were willing to share, my interest was in finding out from them how has the experience of sexual abuse within the church where they took solace affected their spirituality and their religion. Simply put, their faith in God. And then for those of them who had this experience, were they able to disclose? And if they actually disclosed their experiences, what was the church's response to disclosure? And finally, whether they had religion and spirituality as a helpful tool for them to recover and to reintegrate into the society. They were also allowed to make their personal suggestions for the church, what they would love the church to be like in order to feel part and parcel of the church. One particular cultural impact that had an effect on my study was the fact that within the context, most of the people believe that God is responsible for every good thing that happens, and the devil is responsible for every bad thing that happens. And so, when one is abused, we cannot hold the perpetrator accountable because the perpetrator is influenced by the forces of the devil. And so we need to go to God to pray for God to forgive the perpetrator and for the perpetrator to be exorcised of this act, which is demonic, as they term it. So this affected my participants in the sense that they were reluctant to talk, simply because they felt the only consolation they had was to go to God for prayers. Because those they shared with within the church encouraged them to go for prayers. And of course, to see it as the work of the devil that have made the person who abused them to abuse them, and not holding the perpetrator accountable. That made them to shield their sharing. And of course, among those who shared, there were only 13, and the 13 of them were all female, between the ages of 19 and 52. And most of them shared their experiences that they had before they were 19. The Catholic Church, in the context of my study also, is seen as, in bracket or in quote, the breadwinner. Because it's the church that provides education in most parts of the places where my participants are coming from, empowerment opportunity for the people, health facilities. So how do you talk against the one who gives you the bread to eat? That was a big challenge. And of course, the church authorities, some of them take advantage of this, and that leads to cover up. And so the participants find it very difficult to say anything negative about the church, since the church was the one who was looking after them, although they feel pain by the experience they had, but they couldn't talk about it. The culture of entitlement in the context of my work encourages the male sector to feel that they are entitled to having as many of the women as they want. And that's why in the context of my study, we have polygamy. And so most of the participants in my study, they share that the one who actually abused them did not abuse only themselves. The perpetrator abused more than one or two. And in a case, a perpetrator abused 3 siblings together. And they didn't know that they were all abused by the same perpetrator until during the study. So some church authorities choose to protect the perpetrator instead of the victim. And this is because the feel is a shame to say that this person, of course, in the research of the 13, 11 perpetrators were male, and they were all clergy. 3 were female, 1 religious, 2 lay. So they feel that it will be a shame for the church to expose the fact that this clergy, who is very respected in the area, is the one responsible for the abuse. For that reason, most of the church authorities that I encounter prefer that they handle the case off camera, as they will call it. The concept of collective shame, this one had to do with the families where the participants came from. Some of the families resisted their wards or their children to share because it will bring them shame. And it will bring shame to the church. And of course, one of them who eventually shared said, some of the church members came to the family to say that you have brought shame to the church, and so your daughter will never have the opportunity to get married. So most of these things inhibit the sharing. But in the process of accompaniment, for those families who were willing to support their children to share, it was also a big support because the entire family came together and said, we need to put a stop to this. And one way of putting a stop to it is to report. So that was helpful. My findings are interesting because although within the context, in the air, there is no abuse. There is no sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Though we know, we have seen, people have shared, but no one is willing to come out openly. So my findings was that actually abuse happens. Sexual abuse happens within the context of the church in both countries where my research was based. And I had 3 dioceses where the participants came from. And also the church authorities are aware that such abuses happen within the church. As one of them that we reached out to said, yes, we know it's happening, we have the documents, we have the policies, but it's not everything you talk about. The victims are unable to disclose, I found out, because some were ignorant, they don't know who to trust. The people whom they trusted have not led them in a way that they found healing and consolation. So for that reason, they resisted sharing. And some of them feared reprisal actions. And of course, 3 of them who participated in the study, we had to find a way of getting them away from the environment because after sharing, it was not easy and safe for them to be there. About 80% of the participants shared that sacramental confession was used to silence them. When they shared that they have been abused, the people they shared with within the church told them to go for confession because the fact that they have been raped, they've been sexually abused, they are no longer clean, they are dirty. And in our context, virginity is a sacred thing. So for you to have been defiled, it was a sign that you are already dirty and unworthy. So you need to go for confession. And one of them will say, I actually went for the confession, but I didn't know the sin I committed that I was confessing. Justice in this context is elusive because most of the victims never had a sense that they would get justice. And of the 13 participants that took part, I can say only 5 are on the way to getting justice, in a sense. The others, they have reported that the process is very, very slow because of the cultural inhibitions, which some church authorities also buy into. A contributing factor to the movement of people from the Catholic Church, I discovered, is this abuse and the way it is handled. So some of the participants shared that they have left the church because of how the cases were handled. They were not listened to and nobody trusted them. They blamed them. So for that reason, they have left. A few of them shared that they are still there, not because they feel connected, but because of family pressure and societal pressure. Within this context, if you are a parent and you are going to the Catholic Church and your children are no more following you to the Catholic Church, you have a dent on your image because it means you haven't brought them up well. For that reason, they are no longer following you. So when a parent is going to church on a Sunday, you have to go with your children. No matter how grown they are, you are still a child. So at 20, 25, you are still a child according to the context. So some of them remain in the church because they don't want to have problems with their families and also with the society. Support from the church was paramount for most of them. That because they didn't have this support, it was difficult for them to adjust. And of course, they need financial compensation, but from the participant, that was not the first concern they had. The first concern that they want to be listened to, they want to be believed, they want to be accompanied. They want the church to feel that what they are saying is not just abstract, that they have been wounded by the same church that they trusted. It was interesting to find out that of the participants, those who were very vulnerable are those who were frequenting the church because the perpetrators targeted them within the church. And so the high vulnerability of active participants was very high. In conclusion, the question that my research asked was, do religion and spirituality help the victims to recover and to reintegrate? At the end of my study, I can say yes, at the same time no. And I say yes because the 13 participants, they all attest to the fact that they were supported in some way by religion, by their faith, to reintegrate and to heal. At the same time, in the context of my study, we do not have the professional support system to say that these victims will be able to access the support. So for that reason, they fall back on their faith. And that is how most of them feel that they have been healed by their belief and their spirituality. On the other hand, I said no because further questions to the participants reveal that they said they were healed because that is what they think they are expected to say, that religion and spirituality healed them. Despite the fact that some genuinely, like the 5 who are on the way to getting justice, got proper accompaniment together with religious support, psychological support, medical support, and they are being healed because of their connection with the church authorities and religion and faith. The others didn't have that. And so their responses reveal that they have not started the journey of healing. As some of them will say, I thought I have recovered, but I discover I have not because I'm still very hurt. So as long as we know within the context that religion and spirituality can help the victim to recover, this does not stand on its own unless there is proper support and accompaniment from the church, especially listening to them. And so the suggestion was for the church in Ghana and Nigeria, the dioceses that were covered, screening of, before admission of candidates into the religious life and the priesthood was emphasized. Of course, listening to victims and providing them the necessary support they need, and avoiding cover-up for perpetrators, because that is very high, especially if they are church representatives that the church authorities have trusted. Training on sexual abuse and its effects should be continuous, and of course, that those of them who feel that at this point they can no longer cope within the church should not be seen as bad people or people who don't have faith. They should be allowed to do so, while the church in both countries should allow the civil authority to take over some of the cases, because some were criminal cases, yet they were not officially reported. Thank you.